The story of Exodus begins with a promise made long before the birth of Moses, when God spoke to Abraham, declaring that his descendants would become a mighty nation. But before Israel could experience the fulfillment of that promise, they would first endure a period of bondage in the land of Egypt. It is important to understand how Israel came to be in Egypt. Joseph, the son of Jacob, also called Israel, had been sold into slavery by his own brothers and carried into Egypt. Yet God was with him, and through a series of divinely orchestrated events, Joseph rose to power in Egypt. When a famine struck the land, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt in search of food, and they were eventually reunited with Joseph. In an act of mercy and grace, Joseph invited his entire family to live in the land of Goshen. Now these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Exodus 1:1. These were the sons of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and they are the direct ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. The names of the tribes are as follows: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. The family of Jacob, comprising these 12 sons and their households, entered Egypt during the time of Joseph's leadership. They came to Egypt as guests, welcomed by Pharaoh because of the relationship Joseph had established. They settled in the land of Goshen, a fertile region in the northeastern part of Egypt. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. Exodus 1:5. 70 souls entered Egypt. Joseph and his brothers lived in peace, and Israel prospered under the protection of Pharaoh. The people multiplied rapidly in Egypt, and for several generations they enjoyed peace and prosperity. But the situation would soon change. It had been 400 years since the children of Israel first came to Egypt, seeking refuge from the famine that ravaged the land of Canaan. Those years had begun with prosperity, a promise fulfilled by the dreams of Joseph, the son of Jacob. Yet now, as the sands of time shifted, those same Israelites who once sat at the high tables of Pharaoh's court were enslaved, bound by the cruel chains of a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Exodus 1:8. This new Pharaoh looked upon the swelling population of Hebrews with fear. Their numbers grew, and with them the suspicion that they might one day rise against the throne of Egypt. In his paranoia, Pharaoh's heart hardened, like the very stone walls of the cities he forced them to build. The children of Israel were not just laborers. They were oppressed, crushed beneath the weight of a despotic ruler. And it was in the shadow of this oppression that a mother's cry went unheard. Yet heaven listened. Jochebed, a Hebrew woman of the tribe of Levi, had always been a woman of faith. She had seen the promise of God in her children's eyes. And yet, when the edict of Pharaoh came to cast every Hebrew boy into the Nile, her heart broke. The words that haunted her were not just the decrees of Pharaoh, but the silent cries of the unborn children of her people, destined to be sacrificed to Egypt's ruthless reign. When the child came, Jochebed could not bear to part with him. Her heart leapt with joy and terror. For 3 months, she hid him, the baby who was now her hope and her secret. Each day, the cry of her son was a soft, gentle sound, masked in the dark corners of her humble home. But when the boy grew too strong to hide, When his voice became too loud to silence, Jochebed's only choice was the hardest one a mother could ever face. She built a basket of reeds, a vessel like Noah's Ark, to carry her son to safety. She coated it in pitch, making it watertight, and laid her precious boy inside. Then, with a broken heart, she placed him in the waters of the Nile. She did not give him to death. She surrendered him to the God of life. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Psalm 23:1. And so, like an offering, she set him adrift, knowing only that God would either save or take him. Pharaoh's daughter had come to the river to bathe, as was her custom. She walked through the shallows, her attendants surrounding her, when the reeds parted and the basket came into view. There was something about it, something different in the way the waters caressed it. She approached with curiosity. As she lifted the lid, she saw the child, a Hebrew baby, crying in the basket. Her heart broke. Pharaoh's daughter had grown up in Egypt's splendor. She'd been raised in palaces, surrounded by gold and statues of Egypt's gods. But nothing in her life could prepare her for the love that surged through her chest when she gazed upon this helpless child. At that moment, she did not see a Hebrew baby condemned to die. She saw a child to be saved. She immediately took him in her arms, and with a single glance, the course of Israel's destiny was forever altered. It was Miriam, Jochebed's daughter, who had been watching from the distance, hoping and praying. Seeing that Pharaoh's daughter had found her brother, she ran forward in haste. She offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. Pharaoh's daughter, moved by the child's beauty and helplessness, agreed. Miriam returned to her mother, and Jochebed, who had placed her son in the Nile in faith, now took him back into her arms. She was paid to nurse her own child, to raise him in the very courts of Pharaoh's house. And so, Moses, named for being drawn from the water, grew up under the care of his own mother, but in the splendor of Egypt's royal house. He was God's chosen to deliver his people, but he was raised by Egypt's oppressors. Years passed. Moses, though a Hebrew by birth, was now a prince of Egypt. He lived in the grand palaces, wearing the finest linen, dining on the finest foods, and studying the ancient wisdom of Egypt's scholars. He learned the ways of kings, the strategies of Pharaoh's army, and the ways of Egypt's gods. Yet within him stirred a conflict that could not be contained. He was a Hebrew by blood, but he had the privileges of the Egyptians. His brothers and sisters were slaves. His people were oppressed. Every day he saw the whip crack across their backs. He saw their pain, but he was powerless until the day he could bear it no longer. One day, as Moses walked among the slaves, his heart burned with anger. He saw an Egyptian taskmaster striking a Hebrew man, and in that moment, his rage overcame him. He looked around, but no one was near. The Egyptian overseer, his face twisted in cruelty, did not notice Moses' approach. With a quick motion, Moses struck the overseer down, and the man collapsed to the ground, dead. Moses buried him in the sand and thought no one had seen. But the next day, as he tried to mediate a dispute between two Hebrew men, one of them turned on him. "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses' heart sank. His secret was out. His crime was known. The Exodus begins. The next morning, Moses fled Egypt, abandoning the riches, the palace, and the comforts that had once been his. He fled to the desert, to Midian, where he would live as a humble shepherd, a far cry from the prince he had once been. But God had not abandoned him. It was there, in the wilderness, that Moses would have his encounter with God, in the form of a burning bush, a flame that burned but did not consume. It was there that Moses would hear the voice of God for the first time, calling him to the work he was born for. I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt, and I have heard their cry, "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Exodus 3:7-10. Moses, full of doubt and fear, hesitated, but God assured him that he would be with him. Moses was no longer the prince of Egypt. He was a man called by God to deliver his people from slavery. God's plan was set into motion, and the stage was set for the greatest deliverance the world had ever known. Even now, the echoes of Moses' birth reverberate through the story of salvation. Just as Moses was hidden in the waters and saved from death, so too was Jesus hidden from Herod's wrath and saved by the hand of God. Just as Moses was raised in Pharaoh's house, yet called to confront the empire of sin, so Christ was born in humble circumstances, yet destined to confront the empire of darkness. Before we continue the story, subscribe to Christ First Love Bible Teaching. Like this video, share it, and may God bless you as you do so. Let us continue. After 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, far from Egypt's towering walls, Moses had heard the call of God. The shepherd who once fled in fear had returned with a purpose. Now a man carrying not just a staff, but the weight of a divine mission. He was no longer the prince of Egypt, surrounded by luxury, but a humble servant, sent to challenge the most powerful ruler in the world. God had instructed Moses to return to Egypt, to bring his people out of slavery. But Moses' return was not in isolation. Alongside him walked his brother Aaron, a man who had longed to see Moses again, to join in the work that God had set before them. Moses had sent for Aaron, and when they met in the desert of Horeb, the bond between them, once distant, was now sealed by God's command. Aaron, who had remained in Egypt while Moses fled, had heard God's call as well. And though he had been a mere witness to Israel's suffering, he now stood ready to be Moses' voice, to speak to Pharaoh and to the people of Israel on behalf of the God of their forefathers. Moses and Aaron reunited in Midian, the land that had been Moses' refuge. Together they set out toward Egypt, their journey paved with uncertainty. The weight of what lay ahead loomed large, but they were united in purpose. As they walked, Moses shared the details of his encounter with God at the burning bush, how God had sent him to be the deliverer of his people. They were both terrified of what awaited them, but they knew one thing: God's command could not be ignored. When they arrived in Egypt, they gathered the elders of Israel, and Aaron spoke the words Moses could not. He told them what God had revealed, that their deliverance was near, and that God had seen their suffering. The Israelites, weary from generations of oppression, heard the words of hope. The promise of a Savior, sent by God himself, stirred something deep in their hearts. They bowed down and worshipped, their faith reignited. But the real test lay ahead. Pharaoh, Egypt's heart and soul, stood between them and their freedom, and Moses and Aaron, though united in mission, knew that before they could lead the Israelites out of Egypt, they had to face the Pharaoh himself. Moses was accompanied by his brother Aaron, who would speak for him. Together they stood before the most powerful ruler in the world, a man who worshipped Egypt's multitude of gods. Pharaoh looked down at Moses and Aaron, his eyes full of disdain. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover I will not let Israel go." Exodus 5:2. Pharaoh, in his pride and arrogance, stood defiant. "Who is the Lord?" he scoffed, looking Moses squarely in the eye. The God of Israel was nothing to him. He saw only a people to be subjugated, their God powerless against the might of Egypt's gods. Pharaoh had no intention of releasing the Hebrews. The very thought of yielding to a foreign god was an insult to Egypt's divine status. But Moses did not speak on his own accord. He spoke for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one who commanded Pharaoh's defiance to be undone. "Let my people go," Moses demanded, his voice firm, yet filled with the authority of the God who had sent him. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and his response was not one of mercy. He scoffed, not yet understanding that the battle for the freedom of God's people was already being fought in the heavens. The stage was set. Pharaoh had just declared the refusal that would lead to the most dramatic series of events Egypt had ever seen. The 10 plagues, each a judgment from God on Egypt's false gods, its pride, and its cruelty toward God's people. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Despite the warning, he refused. And with each refusal, the plagues became more intense, each one breaking Egypt's will and forcing Pharaoh's heart closer to the brink of breaking. The first plague struck when Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh and warned him that the Nile would turn to blood if Pharaoh refused to release the Israelites. With a simple gesture, Moses raised his staff, and immediately the waters of the Nile turned to blood. The river, which was the lifeblood of Egypt, became a deadly poison, killing fish and making the water undrinkable. The Egyptians were forced to dig for water along the banks of the Nile, but the stench of death filled the land. "By this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the water of the Nile with the staff that is in my hand, and it shall turn to blood." Exodus 7:17. The destruction of Egypt's primary water source was a direct blow to the nation's economy and culture. The Nile was revered as a god, a source of fertility and life. Turning it into blood not only humiliated Egypt's belief system, but also brought economic ruin. Without fresh water, Egypt's agriculture would collapse, and trade would grind to a halt. Israelites, who lived in Goshen, were spared from the plague. While the Egyptians struggled with the bloodied Nile, the water in Goshen remained clean and pure. God had shown the Hebrews that he was their protector, even as judgment fell upon their oppressors. The second plague was one of overwhelming frogs. Frogs swarmed from the Nile and covered the land of Egypt. They infested homes, kitchens, and even the beds of the Egyptians. The Egyptians couldn't even cook or sleep in peace. The frogs were everywhere, a constant reminder of Egypt's humiliation. Pharaoh pleaded with Moses to remove the frogs, and Moses promised to pray to God for their removal. But once they were gone, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. "The frogs shall come up on you and your people, and on all your servants." Exodus 8:4. The frogs were a mockery of the Egyptian gods. Hapi, the god of the Nile, was thought to bring fertility, and frogs were associated with fertility and abundance in Egypt. By sending frogs to overrun Egypt, God showed that even the fertility gods of Egypt were powerless. Next, God sent lice to Egypt. The dust of the earth turned into lice which infested both men and animals, causing great discomfort and irritation. The Egyptian magicians tried to replicate this plague, but they failed. In this moment, the magicians themselves admitted that this plague was the finger of God. The magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Exodus 8:19. The lice were a judgment on Geb, the god of the earth, who was believed to control the earth's fertility. The plague showed that God, the Creator, controlled even the smallest creatures. The magicians, who relied on their tricks, could do nothing to reverse this plague, proving that Egypt's gods were powerless. As with the other plagues, the Israelites were spared from the lice. In Goshen, there was no suffering from this plague. God continued to show his people that he would protect them, even as Egypt suffered. The fourth plague brought an overwhelming swarm of flies. They filled Egypt, swarming over the land, entering homes, and even entering the food of the Egyptians. Pharaoh begged Moses to remove the flies, but once again when the flies were gone, Pharaoh's heart hardened, and he refused to let the Israelites go. "I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen." Exodus 8:23. The flies were an attack on Khepri, the Egyptian god of creation and the sun, who was often depicted as a man with a scarab beetle head. This plague showed that God controlled even the swarming insects and could make them either a blessing or a curse. The flies made life unbearable, filling every corner of Egypt with chaos. The fifth plague struck Egypt's livestock, killing their horses, donkeys, cattle, and sheep. This plague destroyed Egypt's means of transportation, trade, and food, leaving them vulnerable. Pharaoh sent men to inspect the Israelites' herds, but they remained untouched. "Behold, the hand of the Lord will be against your livestock that are in the field, and they shall die." Exodus 9:3. This plague was a direct blow to Apis, the bull god of Egypt, and other agricultural gods. The loss of livestock crippled Egypt's economy and its military strength, as horses were essential for both farming and war. It was a devastating blow to Egypt's ability to function as a nation. The sixth plague brought boils upon the Egyptians. These painful sores broke out on both men and animals, tormenting them. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils covering their bodies, and the pain was unbearable. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw them toward the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and become boils breaking out in sores on man and beast." Exodus 9:8-9. The boils were a judgment on Imhotep, the god of medicine, and Sekhmet, the goddess of healing. Egypt's physicians and healers were powerless against the plague. It revealed that even Egypt's greatest healers had no ability to cure the affliction sent by God. 7. The plague of hail. The seventh plague brought hail, a destructive storm of ice mixed with fire. It struck Egypt's crops, trees, and animals. The hail was so fierce that it destroyed everything in its path. Pharaoh admitted he had sinned, but was unwilling to fully repent. "Behold, about this time tomorrow, I will cause very heavy hail to fall, such as has never been in Egypt from the day it was founded until now." Exodus 9:18. The hailstorm was a judgment on Nut, the sky goddess, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. These gods were thought to control the weather, but God demonstrated his absolute power over them by sending a storm of unimaginable force. The crops of Egypt were completely destroyed. The 8th plague sent locusts that covered the land, eating every plant that had survived the hail. The locusts devoured the remaining crops, leaving Egypt with no food. They shall cover the face of the earth, so that one cannot see the earth, and they shall eat what is left to you after the hail. Exodus 10:5. 9. The plague of darkness. The 9th plague brought darkness so thick that it could be felt. For 3 days, Egypt was plunged into a supernatural darkness that overshadowed the land. Pharaoh called for Moses, but his pride still prevented him from releasing the Israelites. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt." Exodus 10:21. This was a direct challenge to Ra, the sun god, the supreme deity of Egypt. By covering Egypt in darkness, God proved his authority over Egypt's most powerful god, rendering the sun, the giver of light and life, powerless. Once again, Goshen was illuminated. While Egypt sat in darkness, God's people had light in their homes. This was a visible reminder of God's protection. The plague of the firstborn. The final plague was the death of the firstborn. At midnight, every firstborn in Egypt, from the royal palace to the lowest servant's home, died. Only the homes marked by the blood of the Passover lamb were spared. "For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast." Exodus 12:12. The loss of the firstborn was a devastating blow to Egypt, wiping out entire families and causing unimaginable grief. Pharaoh's own son was among the dead, and the kingdom was left in mourning. To the Israelites, blood of the lamb on the doorposts was a sign of protection. The Israelites were spared, and the Passover became a lasting symbol of God's grace and salvation, pointing to the future sacrifice of Christ, the Lamb of God, who would deliver his people from sin. After the death of his firstborn, Pharaoh finally relented and allowed the Israelites to leave Egypt. The 10 plagues had shattered Egypt's might and shown God's supreme power. But the journey was just beginning, and God's people were about to experience a great deliverance. With the final plague devastating Egypt, Pharaoh could no longer resist the power of God. The bitter tears of grief and loss from the death of his son broke something within him. He had been stubborn, defiant, but now there was no choice. Pharaoh, shaking and defeated, summoned Moses and Aaron. "Rise up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go, serve the Lord, as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also." Exodus 12:31-32. As Moses and Aaron left the palace, Pharaoh's decree rang in the air. Israel was free. The people, filled with joy and relief, gathered their possessions. They asked the Egyptians for silver and gold, and the Egyptians, trembling, gladly gave them what they requested. Israel was leaving Egypt. They were no longer slaves. They were a free nation, but the journey ahead would be long and perilous. The Israelites left Ramses, journeying toward the wilderness. But as they moved, God did something unexpected. He did not lead them by the nearest road to the promised land, for that path would lead through the land of the Philistines, where they might encounter conflict too soon. Instead, God led them into the wilderness. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, "Lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt." Exodus 13:17. The people were vulnerable, unsure of what was to come, but God knew that they were not yet ready to face the challenges ahead. God's path for them, though longer, was one that would teach them to trust. As they traveled, the Lord went before them. By day, they were guided by a pillar of cloud that provided shade and direction, and by night, a pillar of fire that illuminated the path. God's presence was not just a guide, it was their protection, ensuring that no matter how uncertain their journey seemed, they were never truly lost. Pharaoh's heart hardened again. But Pharaoh's heart, though softened in the face of death, was still not fully changed. After the Israelites had left, he had a sudden realization. He had let his workforce go. The realization hit him like a stone. Israel was his labor force, and their departure meant disaster for Egypt's economy. Pharaoh turned his mind to revenge. His pride and stubbornness bubbled to the surface. "Why have we let Israel go from serving us?" Exodus 14:5. Pharaoh quickly assembled his chariots and soldiers, 600 of the best chariots, and began pursuing the Israelites. They were determined to bring the runaways back to Egypt, either by force or death. The Israelites, camped by the Red Sea, were unaware of the threat approaching. But as they turned to look, they saw Pharaoh's army, the dust of the chariot wheels rising like a storm. The sight of Pharaoh's army sent shockwaves through the people. Fear gripped their hearts, and panic spread like wildfire. They had left Egypt in haste, but now, faced with an army on the march, they felt trapped, with the Red Sea in front of them and the Egyptian army closing in from behind. Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Exodus 14:11. The Israelites' faith was shaken. They had seen God's mighty works, the plagues, the Passover, but in the face of danger, they lost hope. Their cries echoed in the wilderness, but God's response was clear. "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." Exodus 14:13-14. Moses stood firm. He trusted in God's promise. The God who had delivered them from Egypt's grip would not abandon them now. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God parted the waters. The waters of the Red Sea stood like walls to the left and right. God had provided a dry path through the sea, and the Israelites walked forward, their feet treading on the seabed, while the waters rose on either side. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. Exodus 14:21. The Israelites walked in a miracle of deliverance, the waters standing like walls of salvation, holding back the very elements of nature. The scene was beyond imagination. The people moved forward in awe, but behind them, Pharaoh's army was closing in. But as the last of the Israelites reached the far side, God commanded Moses to stretch his hand out once more. And as he did, the waters of the Red Sea came crashing down upon Pharaoh's army. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all the army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. Exodus 14:28. Pharaoh's mighty army, once the most powerful in the world, was destroyed in a single moment. The Israelites were free, truly free. The destruction of Pharaoh's army was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something new. Moses and the Israelites sang a song of praise to God, a song that had echoed through the ages, declaring the victory of the Lord over the enemies of his people. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. Exodus 15:1. Miriam, Moses' sister, took up a tambourine, and the women joined in with songs of praise. The victory was not theirs to claim. It was God's. His deliverance was total, his power undeniable. Prophetic reflections on what the Red Sea as baptism represent. The Red Sea represents more than just a physical barrier overcome. It is a powerful symbol of the Christian experience. Just as the Israelites crossed through the sea and left Egypt behind, so too do Christians pass through the waters of baptism, leaving behind the world and its sins. The crossing is a symbol of deliverance, of being saved from the oppression of sin and death. In the New Testament, Paul writes, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. 1 Corinthians 10:1 through 2. Just as the Israelites were baptized into Moses' leadership through the Red Sea, so Christians are baptized into Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. And as the Egyptians were destroyed by the sea, so sin and death are swallowed up in the waters of Christian baptism, never to rise again. The wilderness journey begins. With Pharaoh's army swallowed by the waters of the Red Sea, the Israelites stood on the shores of freedom. But the journey was far from over. Though they had been delivered from Egypt, they now found themselves in the wilderness, a barren and desolate land where survival depended not on wealth or strength, but on faith in the God who had brought them this far. And they went out into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Exodus 15:22. The excitement of their freedom quickly gave way to disillusionment. The wilderness was harsh. They were thirsty, hungry, and exposed to the elements. After 3 days without water, they came upon a place called MANNA. But the water there was bitter, undrinkable. The people began to murmur and complain, their faith wavering in the face of their hardships. What shall we drink? Exodus 15:24. But Moses cried out to the Lord, and God showed him a tree, which he threw into the water, Miraculously, the water became sweet, and the people were able to drink. This was not just a provision, it was a test. If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord, your healer. Exodus 15:26. God's message was clear. His people were not to depend on their own strength or wisdom. They were to depend on him, to trust in his provision, and to follow his commands. God sent manna from heaven. The Israelites continued their journey, but hunger soon became another trial. With the empty desert stretching ahead, they began to lament once again, longing for the flesh pots of Egypt, where they had once eaten to their fill. But they had forgotten the oppression they had endured. Now they were free, but they were also learning what it meant to live by faith. Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. Exodus 16:3. God, in his mercy, responded to their complaints. He did not rebuke them outright. Instead, he provided them with manna, a miraculous food that appeared on the ground every morning like dew. The Israelites were instructed to gather it, but only enough for each day. Any leftover manna would spoil. This was God's way of teaching them daily dependence on his provision. This is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. Exodus 16:15. Each morning, the people gathered the manna, and they learned that obedience was just as important as the food itself. They were to gather only what they needed, trusting that God would provide for them daily. This was not just about food. It was about trusting God's faithfulness. Water from the rock. Yet even with manna from heaven, the people's faith remained fragile. They continued to complain, this time about water. They arrived at a place called Rephidim, but there was no water to drink. The people began to accuse Moses, saying, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Exodus 17:3. Once again, God responded. He instructed Moses to strike a rock with his staff. When Moses did so, water poured forth, enough to satisfy the thirst of the entire nation. "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." Exodus 17:6. This was not just a physical provision, it was a spiritual one as well. Christ is the rock that was struck for us, pouring out living water for all who would come to him. This act foreshadowed the ultimate provision of God's grace, the battle with the Amalekites. As the Israelites journeyed, they were attacked by the Amalekites, a nomadic people who sought to strike them down. Israel was vulnerable, a people still learning how to fight and defend themselves. But God gave Moses the strategy. As long as Moses held his staff raised in prayer, the Israelites prevailed. But when he lowered his arms, the Amalekites began to win. Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. Exodus 17:12. This battle was not just a physical one. It was a reminder that victory comes not from military strength, but from God's power. When Moses' hands were lifted in prayer, Israel triumphed. The giving of the 10 Commandments. After weeks of travel, the Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai, the place where God had first appeared to Moses in the burning bush. This was the place where God would establish his covenant with his people. The people gathered at the base of the mountain. The air was thick with expectation. Moses ascended the mountain, where the presence of God descended in a cloud of fire, smoke, and thunder. The earth trembled, the mountain shook. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Exodus 22-3, the first commandment. In the midst of the awe-inspiring spectacle, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, laws that would define Israel as his people, set apart from the world. These commandments were more than just rules. They were a covenant, a guide for living in obedience to God. They would shape their relationship with God and with one another. While Moses was atop the mountain receiving the law, the people below grew restless. They had seen the power of God, but their faith was weak. They demanded that Aaron make them a god they could worship. Aaron, though hesitant, complied. He collected gold from the people and fashioned a golden calf. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Exodus 32:4. The people began to worship the calf, dancing around it and offering sacrifices. God, watching from the mountain, told Moses what was happening. He was angry, ready to destroy the people for their idolatry. But Moses interceded for them, pleading with God to remember his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Exodus 32:11. Moses' intercession worked. God spared the people, though judgment still came. The Levites were commanded to strike down the rebels, and the people were punished for their sin. Yet even in the midst of judgment, God's mercy was evident. The people were forgiven, and Moses went back up the mountain to receive the law once more. The breaking of the tablets and the plague. Moses descended from the mountain, carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant. His heart must have been heavy with grief, for the people had already broken the very law he was bringing to them. When Moses saw the golden calf and the people's idolatrous celebration, he threw the tablets down, breaking them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it to powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. Exodus 32:20. This act symbolized the destruction of the people's false worship. Moses then called the Levites to him, and they were commanded to go through the camp and kill those who had led the rebellion. The sons of Levi did as Moses commanded, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. Exodus 32:28. The consequences of sin were real. Even though God had shown mercy, the rebellion of the people still had to be dealt with. Yet God's grace still remained. Moses once again interceded for the people, offering himself to God as a sacrifice if it would save Israel. But now, if you will forgive their sin, very well. But if not, please wipe me out of your book that you have written." Exodus 32:32. God, in his mercy, forgave Israel, but he warned them that they would still face consequences. He promised to send his angel to lead them to the promised land, but he would no longer personally accompany them due to their sin, the renewed covenant. Despite the sin of the people, God did not forsake his promises. He instructed Moses to carve new tablets of stone and return to the mountain. There, God once again proclaimed his name to Moses, revealing his mercy and forgiveness. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Exodus 34:6. God renewed his covenant with Israel, reaffirming his commitment to them. Moses returned with the new tablets, and the people, though they had failed, now had the opportunity to renew their commitment to God. Despite their grumbling, God remained faithful. He had promised to be with them, and he showed his love and mercy through the tabernacle, a holy place where he would dwell among them. The tabernacle was more than a structure. It was a symbol of God's presence and his desire to be with his people. Every detail of the tabernacle, from the Ark of the Covenant to the altar of sacrifice, pointed to God's holiness, his justice, and his mercy. It was a place where Israel could come to worship and offer sacrifices for their sins, reminding them of the covenant they had with God. "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst." Exodus 25:8. The tabernacle was a daily reminder that God was with them. Yet, as the Israelites continued their journey, they would be tested. They had to choose to follow his guidance, and that choice would determine how long their journey would take. The Israelites' journey should have been a short one, but their disobedience turned what should have been days into 40 years of wandering in the desert. How often do we, too, delay our own journey because we resist God's voice or ignore his guidance? The road to healing, to peace, to freedom, it doesn't have to take longer than necessary. It's in the willingness to trust God and follow his leading that we find the peace we seek. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Proverbs 3:5-6. You don't have to walk in circles wandering in the wilderness. Trust in God's timing, follow his guidance, and he will lead you into a place of rest and promise. God's promises are always true, and his plan for your life is greater than anything you can imagine. God can save you too. The story of Israel's journey from slavery to freedom is our story as well. Like the Israelites, we all face moments of struggle, doubt, and failure. Sometimes we feel like we are in our own wilderness, uncertain, lost, or burdened by the weight of our mistakes. But just as God saved the Israelites from Pharaoh's grip, he can save us from the things that hold us captive today. No matter what you are going through, whether it's a personal struggle, a broken relationship, or the weight of past mistakes, God's grace is greater. He is still calling you out of Egypt, out of bondage, and into his freedom. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Exodus 14:14. Just as God fought for the Israelites at the Red Sea, he is fighting for you right now. Even when you feel overwhelmed, even when the enemy seems too strong, God is still at work in your life. He is leading you toward freedom, toward the promised land of peace, hope, and restoration. So, I want to encourage you today, wherever you are in your journey, whether you're in the midst of a spiritual wilderness or feeling like there's no way out, remember that God is with you. He sees you, just as He rescued the Israelites from Egypt. He can rescue you from whatever you're facing. His mercy is never-ending, and His grace is sufficient. Maybe you feel like you've wandered too long. Maybe you've made mistakes or gone through trials that left you wondering where God is. But hear me when I say, God has not forgotten you. He is still here, and He is still calling you forward. The same God who split the Red Sea, who provided for the Israelites in the wilderness, and who forgave them despite their failings. He is here today, offering you His mercy and His guidance. A prayer for you. Let us pray together. Lord, I thank You for Your mercy and grace. Thank You for showing us through the story of the Israelites that no matter how far we've strayed, Your arms are always open to receive us. I ask for Your guidance and strength today. Help me to trust Your voice and follow You wholeheartedly, no matter where You lead. I surrender my wilderness to You, and I trust that You will guide me to freedom. Thank You for Your faithfulness, and for never abandoning us, even when we fail. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the book of Exodus. As we've seen, God's faithfulness and mercy are unwavering, even in the face of our sin and disobedience. His promises are true, and He is still guiding us through the wilderness of life. If you've been moved by these stories and want to hear more about how God works in our lives, subscribe to Christ First Love Bible teaching for more Spirit-filled stories that speak to our everyday walk with God. Stay tuned for more episodes, and remember, God is with you in the wilderness. Trust His leading, follow His voice, and don't let your journey take longer than it should. God is ready to bring you into the promised land of His peace and provision. May you be blessed and guided in all your steps. Until next time,